I'd been night watchman at Wintermore Grain Station for 6 years before I ever heard the howler, and I want to say plainly, before anything else, that I never believed in it. Not the way the rest of the station did. Not the way Route Marshal Desson Holt did, standing at the mess hall door with his rifle slung and his jaw set like a man who'd already decided what he was going to shoot. The cries started in late autumn, when the windbreak trees along the north fence had gone bare, and the grain elevators stood black against a sky the color of wet ash. Something out past the tree line was screaming at night. Not howling. Not really. That was just the word that stuck, the way words do when people are frightened and need something to call their fear. It was a raw, ragged sound, more pain than threat, cutting off too fast, like whatever made it didn't have the strength to finish. 3 goats went missing from the low pasture. A storage shed got its lock torn clean off. Grain sacks dragged out into the dark. That was enough for Holt. He put together 6 men with rifles and told them to be ready to walk the tree line at first light and end it. I didn't tell anyone I'd already been out there. 2 nights before, on my rounds, I'd followed the sound instead of running from it. Because that's what a medic learns to do. You go toward the noise. Because the noise means something's still alive to make it. I found her in the old drying shed at the edge of the property, collapsed against a grain bin with one arm wrapped tight around her ribs. Sable brown skin, near black in the lantern light. Silver threading through hair the color of char. Eyes that caught my light and held it, moss green, slit-pupiled, and utterly aware of every choice I was about to make. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like someone who'd been running for a long time and had finally stopped because she couldn't run anymore. I set the lantern down slow, on the floor, where the light wouldn't blind her, and I put my hands where she could see them. I didn't say anything clever. I said, "I'm not going to hurt you," and I meant it in every language my voice had, and something in the set of her shoulders told me she understood the tone, even before whatever translator she was wearing caught up to the words. Her name, once I had it, was Vesa Ithra Kor, queen of a line called the Ithrae, on a world I will never be able to point to on any chart we own. She'd been in the sky above us 3 weeks earlier, when her own Ascendancy Guard turned their weapons on her flagship mid-transit. A coup dressed up as an escort, she said, the kind that only works if the person they're removing never gets the chance to speak again. Her drop craft had come down hard in the scrub past the windbreak. She'd survived the landing. She'd been surviving everything since on stolen grain and rainwater, and whatever she could keep down with 3 cracked ribs and a wound along her side that had gone an ugly color days before I found her. The screaming wasn't rage. It was her, at night, when the pain in her side got bad enough that she couldn't keep it locked behind her teeth anymore. I didn't call it in. I want to be honest about that. I broke every protocol I had by not calling it in. But I'd spent 4 years as a combat medic before I ever set foot on Wintermore, and I'd learned one hard rule in that time. You do not hand a wounded, frightened person over to people who are already afraid of them. Fear makes a firing line out of good men. I'd seen it happen to people who deserved better, and I wasn't going to watch it happen again, because I was too tired to carry water out to a drying shed for a few more nights. So I carried water. I carried the field kit I still kept in my truck out of old habit, and I cleaned the wound along her side and packed it the way I'd been taught, and she watched my hands the whole time, with an expression I came to know well over those next 4 days. Not gratitude exactly. Something more careful than that. The look of someone recalibrating what a stranger's hands were for. She talked, some nights, when the fever eased enough to let her, about her mother, who'd worn the crown before her, and told her that a queen who couldn't be doubted had never really been tested. About the guard captain who'd raised the weapon against her ship, a man she'd trusted with her life twice before. She never once asked me why I was helping her. I think she'd stopped expecting an answer to that question a long time before she ever met me. On the 4th night, Holt moved up the timeline. Somebody had spotted lantern light out past the windbreak, my lantern, though nobody knew that yet, and decided the howler had grown bold enough to make camp. He called the walk for dawn instead of the week's end. 6 men, rifles, and a foreman who'd convinced himself he was protecting his people. I got to the shed before they did. I told her what was coming, and she didn't flinch, and she didn't hide. She said, "If they come to kill a monster, then let them see what they're actually killing," and there was no despair in it. There was a kind of terrible calm I recognized from officers I'd served under. The calm of someone choosing to meet a thing head-on because they'd run out of places left to run to. I stood in the doorway when they came up through the gray light, rifles low but ready, Holt in front with his jaw set the same way it had been at the mess hall door. I said, "Nobody's shooting anything tonight," and I meant to say more, some longer argument I'd rehearsed in my head over 4 sleepless nights, but Holt just looked past my shoulder at what was standing behind me, and the argument went out of both of us at once. Vesa stepped into the doorway on her own strength, ribs wrapped, wound closed, standing straighter than a woman with 3 cracked ribs had any right to stand. She didn't ask for mercy. She looked at 6 armed men, the way I imagined she'd once looked at a guard captain who thought her too weak to matter, and she let them see exactly what fear had turned into a monster in their own heads. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then one of the younger men lowered his rifle first, and the rest followed like it was contagious. And Holt, who I'd have sworn would rather die than admit a mistake, took his hat off. I don't know what made him do that. Some old instinct, maybe, older than fear, that still knew what it looked like to stand in front of someone who deserved to be looked at, not shot at. "She's been stealing from the low pasture because she was starving," I said, into the silence that followed. "That's the whole crime. That's the entire howler." My voice cracked some on the last of it, and I let it. Holt didn't say much. He wasn't a man built for long speeches. But he told the others to bring up the truck, and by mid-morning Vesa Ithra Kor was in the station infirmary, under a proper roof for the first time in 3 weeks, and nobody at Wintermore called anything in the windbreak a monster again. She stayed on through the winter, officially as station help, unofficially, as something I didn't have a tidy word for yet. I kept bringing the lantern out to the drying shed some evenings anyway, out of habit, and she started meeting me there, out of something that wasn't habit at all. We never made a scene of it. There was no announcement, no ceremony, nothing the rest of the station could point to and name. Just 2 people who'd stood in a doorway together once, and decided, without saying so out loud, that neither of them was going to walk away from the other. Years later, when people out past the grain elevators still tell it as the story of the winter the howler came to Wintermore, I let them. It's not wrong exactly. Something did come out of that windbreak that autumn, wounded and starving and screaming into the dark because nobody had thought to ask why. It just wasn't the thing they'd armed themselves to kill. It was a queen who'd run out of places to hide, and a lantern held steady enough that she never had to run again.